Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session. We're just going to give a few minutes for people to continue to join. See, there's a lot of people still in the waiting room and coming in slowly. But first of all, I just want to say thank you and just to let everybody know you're in the right place, and we'll get started very soon. Well, you're hopefully in the right place if this is the Geopath Insight Suite Overview and Updates webinar, then you are in the right place. Just didn't want to assume, I guess.
Yeah, and if you're here and weren't meaning to be here, maybe stick around.
Be a lot of fun stuff. Just give it one little bit. It seems like there's still a bunch of people kind of coming in. The number keeps climbing, which is exciting. And again, a lot of familiar names on the list and a lot of new ones. So we're always excited to do these webinars and just see what questions people have and just share a lot of the updates of what's going on. Just give it one more little bit. Sorry if I'm looking off screen. I have a couple screens going. All right, cool. I think that's a good amount of time. I don't want to go too, lose too much of the time for the session because there is quite a bit we want to cover. Again, just to say it again, thank you again to everybody who joined. We really appreciate you taking time to kind of be with us today and to go through some of the changes that we want to talk to you about related to the Insight Suite and just kind of give a general overview. I'm Scott Fischetti from Geopath, and as always, I'm here with Brian Shopper from
Hey, Ron.
Geopath, who heads up, if you've been on any custom trainings, you probably had Brian giving you that training. So again, just thank you for joining, and we'll jump right into it. So I've kind of teed it up already, but just a quick little overview slide. So we want to just give a basic overview of the Insight Suite. I know it's been a little bit since we've done this, so I'm guessing that's why there's a lot of new people on the call as well. So just a kind of a 101 high level overview of the Insight Suite, and we'll get into the Explore module. So how do you review inventory, and then go into how can you create market plans and inventory plans. And then there's a bunch of new features and functionality that we've been introducing slowly into the Insight Suite. So there's constant iteration and improvement that we're working on. So little things here and there. So it felt like this was a good time to just go through these and just share those and make sure everybody's aware of them. You can find them in our release notes within the Insight Suites tool. Maybe Brian, we can even show that as we're going along today. And then there's a
Yeah.
really fun sneak peek that we want to show you about some plan sharing functionality that's coming to the Insight Suite soon. I know we talked about it a little bit last year, but it's a little bit more fully formed. We want to share that with you all. And then, as always, answer any questions. So we'll feel free to put questions in the Q&A widget as we go along. I'll be monitoring them, and we have another person in the background, Luke Barnwell, on the team who you probably also interacted with if you've had questions and geek out. And we'll be monitoring them and try to ask them in the moment so they're more relevant to what's on the screen. And as always, if we don't get to your questions, if we just run out of time, or if it's maybe something that's a little too in-depth to answer in the form of webinar, we will follow up. We always follow up afterwards directly with those people. So I think that's it. Did I miss anything, Brian?
No, I don't think so. And just gonna reiterate what Scott said. I'll probably say this a few times, and if you've ever been on a training with me before, I say this a lot. Please feel free to ask us questions, and like Scott said, we will try to answer them as we're going along, and I'll also stop a few times just to reflect and see if there are any questions on anything we've covered. So yeah, let's get into it.
Right. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Brian take it away.
Okay. Okay. And got to bring that on the screen. Oops. There we go. Can you see that okay, Scott?
Yep.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. So I'm actually going to just minimize that for myself so I can keep an eye on it. Sorry, one sec. Okay. So for the most part, the purpose of this today, as Scott mentioned, we wanted to go through and do effectively a high-level Insight Suite walkthrough. If you've ever done a training with me before or anytime recently, this will probably be similar to the approach that I've taken in the past. And I've woven into it some of the new features that Scott mentioned. So as we go through, I'll make sure I point out, hey, this is a new feature. Be sure to try this out. This is really helpful. So let's get started. I'll start in the Explore module here, and then we're going to work our way over towards the Workspace module and show a few different things over there. So when I'm in the Workspace module, just as a little bit of a general lay of the land here. So the Explore module in front of me, you can see is very map focused. And this is great for going into a particular market, exploring, which operators have media in that market, or where is their media relative to a point of interest that I'm looking at, or how many transit shelters are there in relation to bulletins, things like that. So this Explore module here is really great for getting spot by spot level data, and I'll make sure I show you all that. This is really useful for if you're looking for on a board by board level impressions, reach and frequency at a board level. When we get over to the Workspace module over here, there's a couple different kinds of plans that you can run there, but I will show you over in Workspace how to run a quick market plan, which is effectively a market averages tool for pre-planning, and then how to run things as campaigns in an inventory plan. An inventory plan is a tool, just as an aside, that allows you to run things as a full package. If you're ever trying to understand what are the collective metrics of these spots together, this entire package, what's the reach and frequency of the entire plan, you can do that in Workspace. So like I said, we'll start with some spot by spot level exploration here in the Explore module, and then we'll work our way over into Workspace. So I'm going to actually start over here in the Define Target tab. And the first thing I want to do is assign my market. I'll set this over to the side for a second. So I always take just a few minutes to talk about this because I think this concept of market is really, really important. And it very much so shapes the metrics that are going to be shown to me going forward here. So you can see as I'm going to assign my market, I've got a DMA, CBSA, and county level option set in front of me. And I can actually select multiple within these categories. So if I wanted to group together a couple DMAs, I could do that, CBSAs or counties. As a bit of a background, and you probably see these acronyms all the time, just for a little bit of additional context on these, DMAs are designated market areas. These are effectively Nielsen's broadcast markets. They've more or less become the de facto standard in media measurement and out of home. But they are broadcast markets, so they're generally much larger than the immediate city or the immediate metro area itself. Then we've got core-based statistical areas, or CBSAs. These are a little bit closer to the actual metro area of the market itself. And you can somewhat think of these as the commuter market, or the people who are regularly moving into and out of this market. And then, of course, we can look on a county level. And I mentioned you can actually add things together here. So say if I were, just for example, if I were looking in Arizona, and I use this tip all the time, but if you type a 2-letter state abbreviation and then a comma, it'll pull up all of the counties in that market or in that state. And then you can, with selecting one, you'll see I have this add as individual option. By selecting 2, I have this add as group option. You can see down here. And so if you're ever trying to make a custom geography or a custom market effectively, you can add together a couple counties and maybe create a combined area that's smaller than a CBSA or smaller than a DMA. And that might be really helpful for letting you more closely focus in on the immediate area around a particular market, not necessarily the outer edges of it, but where the core of the moving people end up being. So for example's sake, we're going to look in the Atlanta DMA today. And this assign market function, it can be a little bit counterintuitive. There are 2 things that assign market is able to do. And I like to, like I said, take a minute to talk through this because I think this is really important. So as I'm going here and I'm assigning my market as the Atlanta DMA, the first thing you might think is that the assign market function here is going to let me filter my inventory to the Atlanta DMA market. And it will definitely do that. but that's actually the secondary function of what assigned market does here. The core primary thing that assigned market is doing is this is actually setting my in-market audience base. This is setting effectively my universe of people. So in this case, if I were looking at the Atlanta DMA and clicking add, the first thing that this is doing is setting my in-market audience as the people who physically reside in the Atlanta DMA. And so you may be saying, well, I also want to filter my inventory to that same market. That's the secondary function of this. So when I click the Atlanta DMA here and add that, again, my first thing is I'm selecting my audience base of people who live in Atlanta DMA. And then this pop-up here is effectively just asking me, do I also want to take that same market selection for my inventory? So I'll take my audience base of the Atlanta DMA, and I'm going to overlay that same market designation for my inventory itself by clicking yes. In most cases, you'd probably say yes to that pop-up and set your audience base and the inventory market to the same area. But there could be instances where maybe you were looking at, let's zoom in a little bit here. So, but there could be instances where maybe you were looking at inventory in Atlanta and an audience coming from elsewhere, maybe the Columbus DMA. So you could do some out-of-market targeting if you were to set these different markets as different things. In most cases, you'll probably set your audience market and your inventory market to the same thing. But the reason I spend so much time talking about this is because the audience market itself, again, that underlying denominator of people, that is ultimately going to affect your reach and frequency metrics and the population of the people that you're considering in a general sense. So let me keep going unless there have been any questions, Scott.
Nope, none yet.
Okay. All right, sounds good. So also within this define target tab, not only have I selected my specific market, and you can see I'll pull up the key here so we can look at this. I've got inventory from all sorts of different media types and different media classifications here. So I'll start narrowing that down in just a minute. But what I want to do is then go to my select audience here. Generally speaking, for the, I mentioned I've already set my audience base as the people who live in the Atlanta DMA. But now I can use the select audience here to add a specific target audience that I want to target with my campaign or with my specifically chosen media. So generally speaking, the audience categories are split up into 3 larger sections here. All of the audience data we're leveraging comes to us from Claritas. And so a couple of the major inputs to that, the US Census is a huge one, specifically something called the American Community Survey. And then there's also tons of GFK MRI, Scarborough. There's tons of proprietary survey-based collection data that Claritas does. And what that allows us to do in practice in the Insights Suite is effectively evaluate any piece of media against any of these audience targets. So for the most part, they're split into these 3 large categories. Population, you can see these are largely demographic and census based. So if I were looking at like an age range, or I wanted to start maybe with men of a certain age and a specific income, I can make combinations, and I'll do that in just a second. The next category here is these consumer profiles. So these are effectively spending habits and behaviors of people at a household level. And these are really helpful for understanding if somebody said yes that they drank Bud Light in the last 30 days, it's helpful for understanding, okay, that the people in this household are likely to be doing that regularly. If they fall into one of these categories, it's helpful for understanding the propensity for that person to do that behavior again, basically. And so there's a ton of interesting stuff in here. I'll just kind of scroll through, like plans to buy XYZ in the next 12 months. I definitely recommend coming in here and searching through the categories or just dropping in a keyword and seeing what you find, because there's tons of really interesting specific behavioral categories in here. And then because we are leveraging Claritas's data set, we have this Prism Premier audience group that we can use. So this is Claritas's segmentation product. And because every household in the US is modeled for Claritas's audience data, what they do for the Prism Premier, they segment all of the households in the US into different similar personas or life stage segments. So you can think of these as like young professionals with kids or retirees without kids. And we have more information on these because they have sort of nondescript names here, but we have a lot of info on that we can give you if you need it. Let's say, for example, I wanted to use a demographic-based segment, maybe an age and ethnicity or an age and an income. So I'm going to say, let's start with age. Let's do maybe 25 to 54. 25 to 54. And so once I make a selection here, in the population category at least, you'll see that there's my selected target down here, and then additional things that I can add to this with these different dropdowns. So let's say I wanted to add an income, and let's say people make 75,000 plus household income. So this is my specific target audience here. So 25 to 54, and also people who make 75,000 or more household income. If you are making a combination here and it's something you want to save again for later, you can actually save this audience and then it'll end up in your saved audiences up here if it's like a common combination you plan to use often. One thing I do want to quickly talk about, and I'll show this in practice later, but you'll see this modified base segment option. As a default, the base segment, as a default, the base segment in GeoPath's data and in the Insight suite here is person 0 plus. So the sort of largest scale universe, the largest scale denominator of people being considered by default is everyone, person 0 plus, all people. We have the ability here through the modified base segment to change what that underlying universe of people is. So in cases of, say, maybe an alcohol campaign, or depending on the market, like a cannabis campaign, there may be certain local regulations that would require 80%, say, of the underlying audience composition to be persons 21 plus, because you can't be advertising certain products to certain people. So how would you go about doing that in the Insights suite or in the Insights data? What I can actually do here, I have this specific target segment. I'm targeting people 25 to 54, 75,000 plus income. But I can actually modify the base segment here. And then from this dropdown, I have a few different options, but I can say set this to 21 plus. So I'm only evaluating then metrics against people who are 21 and above. So that's my baseline. And then I've got on top of that persons 25 to 54, 75,000 plus income. And so this will then report as your total base impressions. You'll be looking at persons 21 plus, not 0 plus. And I could do this at like a 5 plus level or an 18 plus level. So just a little bit of an aside as to what the base segment feature does. I'm going to hit apply so we can apply that target audience here. Okay, let me just open up this right-hand menu as well. So again, we're looking at all the media in the Atlanta DMA so far. I've applied an audience, I've applied my market. Let's start going through and filtering out inventory. As a quick aside, just so I remember to talk about this, also in the Define Target tab here, I have a scheduled delivery option. All of the metrics in the Insight Suite by default are 1 week metrics. But say you're always working in 4-week increments or something like that, you can come in here and set this to 4 or 2 or 8 or whatever it is. And then all of the metrics in here will update to be reflective of that time frame instead. So if you're always thinking 4-week increments and that's easier, you can do that, and then everything is already in that sort of time basis. Okay, let's go to the filter inventory tab a little bit. So I'll minimize that for just a second. So again, so far I'm looking at basically everything. The filter inventory tab gives you a ton of different ways that you can filter this group of, I think it was like 20-something thousand, down to much more specific selections. So in the medium placement filter, there are a bunch of different ways that you can target based on media type or the construction or the size. Let's say, for example, I wanted to limit this to just roadside media, just sort of traditional out of home. So you can see under the media class, I have the option to select at a roadside, the roadside media class, fleet exterior, which is bus exterior, or place-based, effectively anything in venue. So let's say for this example, I want to do roadside. Okay, we'll let that catch up. Perfect. Okay, so this is now just showing me bulletins, posters, street furnitures, and walls/murals. So I could go and filter by specific media type, and just as a bit of a best practice, I suppose. There are many different ways that you can achieve the same kind of filtering with these different filters. The media type filter, for example, this one is based on the size of the frame. These are sort of preset categories or larger categories based on frame size. I tend to lean towards this operator media name filter. This can be really helpful, especially if there are, you can see like digital bulletins and bulletins are individual items I can click here easily just with one click. I can do the same thing with, say, media type. But if I wanted to do bulletins and then digital, I would do bulletins here, and under material, I could do digital. So there are a lot of different ways that you can get through, that you can use these filters, but just as a bit of an aside so you know how that works. So for today's example, I wanted to actually filter this to a specific operator because some of the new features that we're showing in here were actually suggested by Jules at Orange Barrel Media. So I'm going to use Orange Barrel Media here just for the example today. So you can see under operators, I can just go and select one or multiple operators. And this will then, in this case, show me only Orange Barrel Media's inventory in this market. And all of the filters in the Insight Suite in general, they're all, they effectively live update on top of each other. So whatever you apply previous will filter into the next. So from here, now that I've done Orange Barrel Media, I can filter by specific media types or filter using like metrics against a particular audience. And there's a lot of different ways that you can go from here. So I'm going to actually pause. Oh yeah, Scott, go for it.
No, I would just wanted to jump in without interrupting and add, like, and that's essentially what the Explorer module is all about, right? Like, it's kind of exactly what you're doing. Maybe if you're a planner and you haven't worked in a DMA a lot, you want to understand the breadth of inventory, the types of inventory, or if you're a media owner, like doing just what Brian did, maybe Orange Barrel or whoever is coming in here and just wants to look at their inventory. And that's the one of the key benefits of this part of the tool, to visualize it and see where it is within the geography that you're looking at.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. One thing I do want to show before I keep moving on. So if you are in the Insight Suite, you're in the Explore module, at a certain zoom level back, these are multicolored dots on the map. And when I start to get close enough, you can actually start to see the directionality of the boards themselves and also the number of faces, generally faces on the same structure. And so if I click on any unit on the map, so I'll just click this mural here, you get a little bit of an overview about what it is. And you can click here for more details. And again, for every unit in the system, there's one of these inventory detail sheets if you go and you click it on the map. And so this will show you a lot of really interesting information about this particular spot. Because we understand based on home locations and travel data, we have this understanding of where the audience of a board actually resides. So that's something you can actually visualize here and explore on a map at a zip code level. So this is the actual percentage of audience for this unit at a zip code by zip code level. So 8% of this audience for this unit comes from 30303. Interesting. And then same thing for at a DMA level. So interestingly, about just shy of 82% of this board's audience come from the local Atlanta DMA, but there's nearly 2% weekly of the board's audience coming from the New York DMA, or almost 1% coming from the DC DMA. And I can also get a really high level look at some metrics here because I've applied a specific audience. You can see there's my target audience, and I've applied a market. I can get a sort of high level overview of some metrics here. The last thing I just wanted to quickly show at the bottom here is this fluctuation of impressions throughout hours of the day or days of the week. And this can be really helpful for, especially if you are using, like, if you're looking at a digital unit, or if you are trying to make some decisions based on commuter patterns or driving patterns. This can be really helpful for driving that kind of decision making. So if I were to just kind of hover over one of these lines, for example, so I'm looking at Saturday here. You can see there's actually an evening spike in impressions compared to the rest of the day on Saturday. But if I were to look at, say, like Monday through Thursday, the peak is likely in the morning. It's close in the afternoon, but there's a peak in the morning. And you can just see throughout an average week how these impressions fluctuate. This data will get exported if you export this to a PDF. And like I said, this exists for every unit in the system. And these can be really helpful, effectively like photo sheets for these units.
Mm-hmm.
Scott,
One thing, no, just to add on to what you were doing, one thing I always like about the hour of day, day of week chart that's down there, it helps you visualize a story. Like, to me, when I see this, don't know this unit in particular, but I would guess it's in an area where there's a lot of nightlife, weekend nightlife, probably restaurants, bars, etc., and people are going there, and you could see that spike on the weekend. It also can help guide what kind of advertising you might want to recommend, or what type of client you might want to recommend that unit for as well. So I feel like it helps with the storytelling aspect of it as well.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay, so I wanted to just pause there for a second. So let's say instead of looking across all of Orange Barrel Media's inventory in this market. Let's say I wanted to look for specific inventory based on IDs. So you maybe, if you've used the tool recently, you may have already seen this, but this is actually one of the new features that I wanted to highlight. So in the filter inventory tab up here, so I've got, like I said, a bunch of different ways to filter my inventory. Here under specific IDs, this is one of the new features, not the ID filtering itself. Before, this was limited to just Geopath Spot ID or Operator Spot ID. But you can now see, actually, we have the ability to now filter by specific frame IDs. So if instead of wanting to look at a spot level or filter for a particular spot, let's say I wanted to put in a frame ID and look at all of the spots on that frame. So what I can do, I actually, over on my other screen here, I have a collection of, it's like 10 or 11 spots. These are, or frame IDs actually. So I'm just going to grab those and paste them in. And the tool is really good about parsing these out for you. So you can just grab, I've done this with thousands of spots at a time. I wouldn't go crazy, but you can do this with a lot of spots at a time and just paste them in either from an Excel sheet or from an email, and it should be able to parse them out for you. So by filtering now for these specific frame IDs, what this will do is this will actually, instead of those 2,300 spots, this will pull up the, in this case, there's probably about 7 spots of frame. I'm just kind of guessing. I don't know if it's exactly that. There may be, a variation there. But I can now see all of the spots on these specific 11 frame IDs that I've pasted in here. And like I said, the reason I wanted to use Orange Barrel Media inventory is because this suggestion was from Julie Folkers on the Orange Barrel team. And I think this is really helpful because this was not necessarily something you could do before. Let's see. Yes. Okay.
And
so one of the things,
sorry, can I
go for it.
Just to build on that, if you do find features or have suggestions, please share them with us, either through Geek Out. There's even a place within the tool that you can. So I know we're calling out Julie because they had made this request, but anybody, feel free. We're always trying to improve and make the Insight Suite better and easier for everybody. So any suggestions we're open to.
Absolutely. So one of the other things that is kind of a sibling to this new frame ID feature in a way. So I'm looking on the right-hand menu here, and just as an aside, I realized I didn't mention this. The spots summary list that I have up top, this will show me the collective metrics of the spots that are currently in my filter for whatever my time frame is and against my audience and my market. So I've got my specific Atlanta DMA market, my specific target audience here, and 1 week metrics. And so these are the collective metrics for these 77 spots. I can actually go, and if I click View as Table, this will give me a much, much more detailed view of the inventory data at a spot-by-spot level. And this is kind of what I was saying at the beginning, that you can use the Explore module for finding spot-by-spot level metrics and delivery and things like that. When we want to look at something like campaign level metrics, that's what we'll do over in Workspace. But really, the quick thing I wanted to show here, and then I'll keep going with my example, is that not only can you now filter by frame IDs, but we've actually also exposed the operator frame ID field in the tool here. So this existed in the database, but it's not something that was addable as a column in your tool here. So you can now do this in Explorer, and it's also in the inventory plan side of Workspace. But if you ever wanted to just have additional ID information, because I know there's so many different specific cuts of this spot versus this spot, or this frame versus this frame, it can be really helpful to have more frame options for the IDs here, or more ID options in general. So let's say, for example, I'm going to minimize that and back up a step. So maybe I don't want to look at specific frames. Maybe I wanted to look across the entire Orange Barrel portfolio here, for lack of a better word, and evaluate these in a different way. So one of the things, and I think this is honestly a really interesting exercise, because it kind of, like Scott was saying with the hourly data, this exercise in doing this function in the tool here can actually point you towards interesting insights about where an audience might be more well represented, or how different types of media reach different types of audiences in general. So one of the things that I like to do, and I do this on a lot of the trainings that I do here, you can use the sort by and select dropdowns, and you can also do this in the table view as well. But you can use the sort by and select dropdowns here to effectively point you towards units that are most well equipped for a particular metric against this audience. So as a reminder, our audience here is persons 25 to 54, 75,000 plus household income. So let's say, for example, using the sort by, I could filter this by default. I'll say this is at a target composition percentage, which is effectively, it doesn't say in market, but I'll use the in market version of this. It's effectively the target impressions or target market impressions over the total in market impressions. It's effectively the percent of the impressions that are against your target audience. So that's the default sorting here. But like, look, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can evaluate this, a lot of different metrics. Let's say, for example, I wanted to look at composition index. And just as an aside, while this is loading, composition index is a really helpful metric for evaluating something against the average in the market. An index of 100 represents the average delivery in the market, and any number above or below that 100 is basically that percentage above or below average. So say I have a unit that is indexing at 110 for reaching this audience, it would be 10% above average compared to the market average for reaching this particular audience. You can think of index and composition in general, but index especially as effectively efficiency at reaching your audience. So what I can do now that I've sorted for comp index, what I can do is instead of looking at all 2,300 spots, let's say I wanted to look at just the top 25 spots for this. And what's interesting here, and because there are digitals, there may be a couple that are closely grouped together, but what I can see is there's a whole lot of this group of 2,300 spots that have gotten filtered out. And there's definitely a clustering by area of the spots that are high indexing for this target audience. So I can kind of use this to start to understand, okay, maybe my audience is really well represented in this eastern part of the market here. Just as sort of a counterexample, and you know, there's a lot that you can do with this, but let's just to kind of show this as a counterexample. Let's say I wanted to look at maybe not the reach or the index, but let's say individual reach percent. So yeah, down here, target reach. So this is a per spot reach level. And I find this to be really interesting because now, again, we're looking at all 2,300 spots. I'll back up a little. And again, if we look at the top 25 for this cut of the metric data, you can see a much different grouping of spots comes to the top as far as the top 25 here. And so what you can actually do, you see this third drop down over here, save as. I have this option to save things to my account as an inventory set. And you can also, there's a couple things you can do with this, but you can download to a CSV as you're doing these different comparisons. And effectively, like if I were to do this export for the top 25 reach units, and then the same thing, I could export the top 25 comp index units. I could see if there are any boards that are common between those lists and see like this is a really well-rounded unit for index, for reach. It maybe it has a lower impression level than some of the other ones, but more impressions are going to my target audience. So you can do a couple things using the tool here to basically find commonalities. And I can save things to my inventory set. So let's say, for example, I wanted to just take this group of 25. Maybe I don't even want all of them. Maybe I can, let's say I'll deselect that one and I can scroll down. Maybe I'll deselect this one. Let's get this down to like 20. Sure. And one more. I can just kind of deselect a few of them. So what I can do now is I can actually save this group of 20 spots to my account as an inventory set. There's a lot that you can do with an inventory set, and I'll just kind of let this load. There's a lot you can do with an inventory set. I'm going to take this over to Workspace in just a minute and run an inventory plan on this. And this makes this really easy. Like if I wanted to come back in tomorrow, say I load up the Insight Suite fresh, I have a fresh browser in front of me, I can easily pull up this group of 20 spots as a saved inventory set, and then go and just right away filter right to that. So let's call this Atlanta, and you can just kind of name these whatever you want. 25, 54.
And you know, another way, once you have that inventory set, as you're doing that, Brian, like just the example you were doing, you looked at it by composition index and filtered for 25. You could save those, and then as you do it for reach, you can just keep adding to that set, and it'll deduplicate it for you. So you start to have a set of inventory that starts to be highly, connected to the different metrics you're choosing, reach and frequency. And then you could use that, narrow down view to just assess those individual units as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I find this, like I said, with the looking at the comp index version and then looking at this version here based on reach, I find it to be a really helpful exercise for just kind of seeing the way that different media types effectively reach different audiences. Like if I were to look at this as a frequency, and I haven't tested this, so this may not be what I'm expecting here, but a lot of the times you'll see with the reach example I just did, a lot of the that's interesting. Yeah, so this is actually kind of so there must be a lot of repeat exposure in this downtown area, sort of among these murals and these posters or these bulletins. So I know. Let me just keep an eye on time here. So let's head over to the workspace module. So
just
yeah,
sorry,
we have
Brian,
questions.
just before you do, just so people are aware if they're new to the Insight Suite, we don't have to jump into it now, but if you can just click the button over so you can see the different libraries in here,
Oh,
just
yes.
high level. Because there's two other aspects to the Explore module. There's a population library, which you could create heat maps of any of the audiences we have, and do it by zip code within a county, within a DMA, et cetera. And then the places library. So if you need to look at whatever, all the Starbucks or all the Burger Kings within a DMA, or even down to, I remember I was helping somebody with finding a single chiropractor in an area and mapping inventory around that. So you can go as big or as narrow as you want. And so those are two aspects. And we do have training tutorials on all of this stuff. But I do think jumping over to the workspace module is great because that's an important part of the tool as well.
Yep. Yeah. And the population in the places library, if you have questions about those, reach out to us. There's, like Scott said, there's a lot of helpful material, but there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with those, targeting based on radius and things like that. So there's a lot of fun stuff you can do with that. As I go into the workspace, there are kind of two general areas that you can do your work. I'll show you how to run. There's two different types of plans that you can run: a market plan and an inventory plan. I'll show you quickly how to do both of those. Just as a bit of tool usage here, you can see I have this projects option here, and these are effectively different folders with different tests, or not tests, different projects and scenarios within them, different plans. I also have this sandbox area, which is effectively a large unstructured plan. So for example's sake, I'll start here in sandbox and I'll just add a scenario, but you can always go and move things later. So I can click and move things around. I can rename, I can rerun, I can duplicate. You can completely come back in here and organize this later on. So I personally opt for going into sandbox and just hitting add and starting there. So I mentioned quickly at the beginning that there are two different types of plans in here. I'm going to start with a market plan. In a lot of cases, especially for our agency members, market plan may actually be your first step in the Insight Suite. And so this is a market averages tool. And basically what I'll do is I'll go and I'll kind of recreate what we were just doing in Explore. Same kind of audience, same media type selections. And this is really helpful for understanding of all of this media, how many average spots would I need to achieve a certain goal? Or what would the outcome of 10 average spots or 20 average spots of this type get me if I were to look at these metrics? And so this can be a really helpful starting place. In most cases, when you are in Explore and looking and selecting actual spots based on their proximity or their placements or their attributes, you may not end up selecting the most average spots. And so in a lot of cases, you'll need fewer spots than the average recommends here. But I want to show you how to set this up, because I think this is really useful. And a lot of our operator members use this for like rate cards and things like that, like creating standard packages for the fleet and things like that. So let me just kind of recreate what I was just doing in Explore. So, reset. I think oops. Sorry, hold on. Sorry, one sec. I'm just going to refresh. My session has expired. That's interesting.
You're talking to my, just teasing.
I'm waiting for that to happen when I get to inventory plan, because fair warning, that might happen. Luke who's watching has seen it happen to me a million times on training. So let's hope it does. So I'm gonna just recreate what I was doing before in Explorer. So I was looking at persons 25 to 54, household income of 75,000 plus. And you know what? Had I saved this, this would have been a little bit quicker. So maybe I would want to save this. You know, I will. Maybe later. But you can. So I'm gonna hit add there. Same audience we were using before. Market, same thing. So I'm gonna do Atlanta and I'll click add. Just like in Explorer, I get this pop-up here. Again, setting my audience base first and then filtering my inventory to that same market. In this case, I know I want to look at Orange Barrel Media's inventory, so I'll add that. And this is probably the most specific part of setting up a market plan. And just want to take a second to talk about this. So this gives me all these different filters and ways to select a specific media to include. I always recommend using media class as your first one, and then something like media type or operator media name for a specific media type selection. But you definitely want to, in this case, I only have roadside to choose from, but you definitely want to select a media class as sort of a standard best practice here. And the reason that is, and I can kind of just voice this over, say I'm looking at something like a kiosk or a digital kiosk, which I know a lot of the Orange Barrel Ike media is. So there are instances where something called a kiosk may be actually a roadside unit, or it could be something that falls under place-based. There are kiosks that exist in place-based venues. If I were to just if I were to just select digital kiosk, the system wouldn't necessarily know which media type or which classification I'm talking about, and it might not know what type of media to pull. So in general, say I'm looking at the roadside media here, and I want digital kiosks. So when you add your selected media, you'll see the media classification first, and then the specific media selection after that. Again, I always recommend selecting the media class first, even if you only have roadside as an option. It's just a best practice to do that. Oh, I've already added. Okay. So let's just review. So I've got my audience here, Atlanta DMA, Orange Barrel Media, specifically looking at roadside digital kiosks. And let's say this is a 4-week campaign. And so then I can see like what my goal is that I'm going to sort of effectively set this average against. So I can do it at a TRP level. 200 TRPs is the default here. I can do target market impressions, a reach percent. Let's say I wanted to just do a count of spots. So maybe I wanted to understand, say like 35. What would 35 digital kiosk spots in this market against this audience on average get me here? So I'll generate this. And there's a lot that you can do after you've already run this. And same thing with the inventory plan when I head over there. But again, what this will do is this will take all of my input parameters, the specific target audience, the market, the media type, and it does a bunch of calculations in the back end, and it ranks everything and says, okay, this is the average spot delivery. And then it kind of works outward from there for starting at most average and working out. So this is saying starting at the most average of the digital kiosks and working out 35 places, the average 35 digital kiosks that Orange Barrel has in this market against this audience, I would get about 10% reach against this audience, about 28, 29 TRPs, reach net. So just as a quick aside, and I didn't voice this over before, but reach net is actually a really interesting figure. This is the unique number of different people of the target audience who live in the market who would have seen this. So these 35 spots, these average 35 spots would reach just shy of 200,000 unique individuals, and on average about 3 times. So what this can be, and also if you expand this, you can actually tweak these amounts here. So I could change the number of spots, or let's say I wanted to understand like what do 50 TRPs look like, or 10% reach, and so maybe I want 12% reach. So you can go and make edits there. And if I actually go up to this parameters option, I can completely reconfigure every piece of this plan. I could add a different audience, different market selection, different spots, or a different inventory type at least. The same editing is true in market or inventory plan. But so I mentioned earlier that this is sometimes, especially for our agency members, this may be a first step in the process. I've now come in here and said like, okay, I know I'm going to look in this market at this type of media. I know the general, the general metric range I'm looking for. about 35 spots. I can expect about that, maybe a little bit higher because maybe I'm selecting based on proximity to certain things. But this at least gives me sort of a good ballpark to start with. And then I can go into explore and look at specific spots or specific, proximity-based things. Let me keep moving. I know, yeah, we got about 15 minutes. Any questions while we're going?
None that have come in, but
Okay.
definitely feel free to
Yeah.
add them.
Yep. Okay. So same thing. I'm in the sandbox here, and I'm just going to add a scenario. And you'll see it'll start with a market plan selected. If you head over, you can see the setups are very, very similar. Same kind of 4 buttons across the top. Um, this is just a bit of a best practice. I recommend this in every training that I do. I personally tend to actually start with my inventory selection here, and you'll see why as I'm doing this. But so as just a bit of advice when you're coming to an inventory plan here, I definitely recommend having inventory already selected when you come to this step. You can use filters to pull in inventory based on like this media type in this market. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that. You'll see, like I can come over here and do select attributes, and I can use all these different filters here and select inventory that way. But there could be instances where you are pulling in thousands of spots and not meaning to. So I think having inventory already specifically selected is really helpful. So as far as adding my inventory goes, I'm just going to open this back up. I have a few different options for how to add specific inventory to this. And this is actually one of the new ID or one of the new options here. So just like we were seeing in Explorer, you can now filter by specific frame IDs. So if I wanted to just put in those frame IDs here, I can do that. One of the other things that's an enhancement here, and I'm not necessarily going to use these spots for my plan, but I wanted to shout this out. And I'm not sure if he's on, but Andrew Marcus was actually from Clear Channel. He was actually the inspiration for this specific tweet coming up. So in this ID filtering here, I can take a bunch of IDs just like I can in Explore, and I can paste these in. So I've got about 20 IDs here, and I just pasted them in. And so now if I click down here, you'll see apply selections gets clickable. And so when I click apply selections here, you can see it's taking accounting of these, and it is going to effectively validate them for me. So some of the spots in this case, some of these are invalid IDs. I didn't really know that actually. But this validation window, this was in here, I came to find out, but it was kind of buried deeper in the UI. So now it's up front. Right after you paste in your IDs, you can easily see this. And so if I scroll down, and this is part of the reason for this enhancement, it used to be somewhat difficult to be able to tell what specific IDs were not valid. You would have to kind of scroll through and find the IDs either with the red X's here or navigate your way to this, but it was a little hard to find. So this is now put right up front, and you can look at these in a list. I could copy these out and maybe say, hey, someone on my team, like, hey, do you know if these are the correct IDs? These are coming back as invalid. In this case, I actually know that these are frame IDs. I'm kind of putting a fake example here. I know that these are not spot IDs, they're frame IDs, and that's why they're failing. But this gives you the option to then copy these out and find out more information, or I can just remove them. And now I've got, okay, here are my 16 that are valid, and maybe I copy these for reference elsewhere, and I've got 16 spots validated right here. So that is a new feature that we've added, kind of enhanced. So I'm just going to quickly, because I know this does this to me, I'm going to just refresh, because I was saying this earlier. Sometimes when I'm talking through an inventory plan setup, I spend so long talking through it, the timeout happens and I have to reset it. So I'm just going to do this real quick. Yeah.
And as you're doing that, and Brian referenced, it's good to have an inventory set, and I do as well. I often start from inventory when I'm creating an inventory plan. One of the things that's nice about the tool is if you have inventory in different geographies, by just dropping it in there, it'll sniff it out for you, and it'll ask you, do you want me to select the markets based on the inventory for you? So it's doing a lot of the work for you as well. So that's why it's often nice to start from the inventory side of the plan.
Yeah, that is really helpful if it's like a multi-market campaign and you've got hundreds of spots across different markets. you paste them in, and it sorts them all out for you. Like Scott said, it's very helpful. I will also mention this is probably especially useful for our agency members. This from file upload option can be really useful if your campaign has differing start and end dates on a spot by spot basis. You can set like a calendar date for the entire campaign, but say spots in the campaign don't all run the same length. Maybe one's on for 2 weeks and then another one comes on and the original comes back on. You can use this CSV upload here, and basically all you have to give it is the Geopath spot ID, the start date, and the end date, and it'll do all that overlapping for you. So this can be really helpful if you're just sort of trying to upload from a CSV and maybe you already have a working file with the start and the end dates,
Brian,
with the flight dates, basically. Yeah.
Just to go with your example, you could even like for one spot, start date 1, end date 1, start date 2, end date 2.
Yes.
And upload it. So just
definitely, and I can actually show that on a spot level too. So I'm going to pull in the inventory set I saved before. This is that Atlanta 25 to 54. And you'll see as I go to apply it, like Scott was saying, it gives me the option for how to assign the market based on the inventory itself. So I know I'm looking at Atlanta DMA inventory. So I'm going to select at the DMA level. And I know this is all within one DMA. It's not like spread across the edges of a couple, so I don't need to group them together. I can just hit add as individual. And so again, by starting with my inventory selection here, I've added the specific spots from my inventory set. It doesn't show it, but the system knows that these are Orange Barrel Media units, and it has allowed me to auto-select my market. So by starting with the inventory, I've actually done all 3 of these in one step. So I can now go and then I'll add, I'm just going to add a couple different audiences here, because you can have a bunch of different audiences in your plan, and I can run these same 20 spots against many audiences and evaluate how they work against different target segments. So let's just pull up that same one I was using, and again, another use case where it might have been helpful for me to save it for myself. But so let's also say, so that's the original one we were using. Let's say I wanted to also add maybe persons 35 to 64, and I want to add that. And let's say for this one, I want to actually do a 21 plus base audience. And I'll also add a consumer profile. Let's say people who have a home mortgage. Sure. Okay. So really the last thing I need to do is just select my time frame for this. So I've got preset numbers of weeks that I can do right here. So say I wanted just sort of a generic 4-week period, I could do that. Or I could also, if I switch this to specific, I can then do actual calendar and start and end dates. So let's say I want to run this the entire month of April, just for an easy example here. Hit generate. Good, that did not time out on me. That's always good to see. And so this is now going to generate in the background, and I can go and do other stuff in the tool. I can run other plans. I can clean up some, probably should clean up my sandbox here a little bit. But you can kind of keep track of it in the top right corner here. And this is only about 20 units, or 20 spots. So this will say in a second, like 20 spots found, and then it'll say finished. Like I said, you can do other stuff. You don't need to like wait for this. I can go back and explore. I can do other things, but I'll just pull this up because this will be done in just a second. While we're waiting for this, if anybody has questions on anything I've covered or anything we didn't cover, definitely feel free to send them into the Q&A. And we can communicate with you after the fact if we don't get to it now, or if you think of it later, that works.
And if you do think of it later, you can always reach out to us at geekout@geopath.org.
Yes, absolutely. So it looks like this should be just about done. 20 units found. I'm going to go back because it did finish, but I think I clicked in too soon. Okay, so as this is pulling up, so because I use the same 20 spots for all of these plans. However, you can see any variation in target audience, or as Scott was saying, like if you put in a bunch of spots from across a whole bunch of different markets, you'd have different markets here as different sub plans, basically. Because I have 3 different target audiences within this overall inventory plan, you can see I have basically 3 sub plans, 1A, 1B, and 1C. So this is my original one, 25 to 54, 75,000 plus income. And what's really interesting, you can see the base market population. And this is actually a good example of this. So the base market population of all persons in the Atlanta DMA, 7.5 million. When we are only considering persons with a base audience of 21 plus, our underlying base audience population is actually 2 million fewer, so about 5.5 million. And then we can see the audience, the target audience population as well. So it's actually a good proportion of the 21 plus audience is vice versa. The 35 to 64 is a good proportion 21 plus. But what's really interesting, and this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about the audience base and the in-market universe of people, you know, we've got different target audience universes here, all sort of in and around 2 million. And so if I start to scroll over, I can look at different impressions and different target metrics against all of these. But what I think is really interesting, and this is actually a good example of this, there's about a 2 or so, somewhere in the 2 million target impression or target population for each of these. But you can see I've got about 35%, 36%, very similar, 44%. When I look at the reach net figure, these percentages, even though like this one and this one, top and bottom here, very similar in percentage, reach percent wise, but the unique number of different people reached by these are different, about 130 or so thousand different. And that's just sort of a function of the universe base itself. The percentage is directly tied to the universe base, and that gets sort of multiplied out as the reach net here. And you can see the average number of times over a full month that this is being seen. So this is great if you are looking for not only the summary level, campaign level reach and frequency and impression metrics, but I can then go and open this up and look on a spot by spot level as well at the spot level metrics. And it's a little cramped. Let me see if I can open this up. A little cramped because I have a lot going on my screen here. But if I were to scroll all the way over, and this is kind of what Scott was saying. So I can actually, on a per spot level, let's say this one is on for 10 days, and then it comes on for like the last 10 days of the month. Maybe there's 10 days in the middle that it is not on. So 21 days total. I can make edits on a per spot level if I've done specific dates, and then I can regenerate this, and this will update for just the days that this is that this would be on. So as just a little bit, I know we're right at the end. The last couple things I want to do, because there's one new feature we want to do a quick sneak preview of. So I'm just going to save this. If I were to go to export just one last thing here, you'll see I have two different options here. Really, the data is the same. It's just about the formatting. So the Excel export will give you everything in one file. The CSV export will give you each of these subplans in a different CSV file in a zipped folder, basically. So you'll get the same data, just about the formatting. So what I want to show you here is if I go back to this plan, and you know, let me just quickly rename it so it's easy for Scott to see. So what I can do, Atlanta example, and then today's date. So I can go back to this plan, and this is not yet exposed to any of you, to most people actually, but we have some more internal features. So this is a bit of a preview of where we're going with this. You'll see I have this share scenario option. So what I can do is if I leave it as default, it'll stay just visible to me, just within my account. But what I can do is I can say share with everyone at my organization. So this would share with everybody at Geopath. Or I can also share with somebody at another Geopath member organization. So I can go and I can select different organizations. So if you're trying to collaborate with maybe between an operator and an agency, or share with everyone on your team and maybe set some standard templates or parameters, you'll be able to then share here. And so just for example's sake, I'm going to click Geopath admin, which is just kind of our internal testing here. And so I also have the option here, do I include the setup parameters or not? Do I give the person the option to see what the plan setup was, or do I just share the actual output? So I'm going to select include the setup parameters, and I'll submit that. So I'm actually going to stop sharing, and I'm going to let Scott have a chance to pull it up on his account, because he should know that I have shared that. He should be able to go in and look at that shared plan instantly.
Right. All right, let's see. You gotta move that over. Oops.
Oh, sorry, we undid it on each other.
All right, so now I'm in my workspace, and I'm gonna come over here to shared. Let's see if maybe I should refresh because I opened it up, and let's see. You could see there were already shared plans in there. So
there you go.
An example for two. So what does it look like when I open it? So I get to see all the metrics that Brian had created, but then also I get to see the parameters, as he said, because he shared all of the parameters as well. So this is a great way and something that we've been asked about for a bit of time now, and it was something we've been working on. So I see a lot of value in this. Potentially, obviously working within your organization, but maybe if you're responding to an RFP or something like that, you can share within the tool between members. So maybe making that a little less, a little more frictionless to be able to kind of work with each other across organizations as well. And I know we're right at time. We're actually a minute over. So thank you, Brian, for taking us through that. Thank you for everybody for sticking around so long. If you do have any other questions, please reach out. We're always here. We're happy to set up a custom training for your organization as well. This is one of the things we do often for our members. So please feel free to reach out. It's geekout@geopath.org. You can reach out to Brian. You can reach out to me. You can reach out to Luke, who's also in the session as well, Luke Barnwell, but also geekout@geopath.org. So we're always really happy to do this. And we want to make sure everybody feels comfortable with the Insight Suite. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a ton within the Insight Suite, tons I didn't even get to today. I'd be happy to show you more or answer any questions you have. So I want to make sure nobody ever feels shy about reaching out or asking questions. It's always welcome.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Have a good rest of the week.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.